They took me to court to prove I'd lost my mind. My own 4 children, sitting 3 rows in front of me in a county courtroom in the good clothes I paid for, listening to a lawyer describe me as a vulnerable elderly woman in cognitive decline. I looked down at my hands, at the wine-colored polish I'd painted on myself that morning. Steady, no smudges. And I thought a woman in cognitive decline does not drive herself to court at 8 in the morning. She does not parallel park in front of the courthouse. She does not sit here calm as a Sunday with a 35-year-old ledger in her lap and every number in it memorized. My name is Anna Boone. I'm 64 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, my children believed I was a bank that happened to love them. That morning, they were about to learn I was something else. The courtroom smelled like varnished wood and old paper. A ceiling fan turned slow above the judge's bench, clicking on every 3rd rotation. My oldest, Denise, sat with her back straight and would not turn around to look at me. That was the first thing that told me she knew exactly what she had done. Because here is what her lawyer did not say. He did not say that 15 days earlier I'd had surgery and not one of my 4 children came to sit beside me. Not one. He did not say that when the hospital discharged me, I called my own Uber home gripping a walker and let myself into a house with an empty refrigerator and a wall full of their smiling photographs. He did not say that they hadn't forgotten me. They had been busy. People always ask me the same 3 things when they hear this story. Why would grown children try to have their own mother declared incompetent? What was really written in that green ledger I carried into the courtroom? And the one they ask the quietest, leaning in like they're almost afraid of the answer. Why wasn't I angry? Oh, I was a great many things that morning. But anger is a hot thing, and hot things make your hands clumsy. What I felt was cold, clear. The way the air goes still and sharp right before the first snow. My husband Samuel used to say I had the soul of a bookkeeper, that I could look at a column of numbers and hear it confess. He's been gone 6 years now, but he left me 2 things before he went. A ledger, and a sealed envelope I wasn't supposed to open unless the children ever forgot who I was. They thought they were burying me. They had no idea they'd handed me the shovel and that I'd been quietly digging in exactly the right direction for 3 years. To understand why I was smiling in that courtroom, a small smile the kind you hide behind a cough, you have to go back 15 days. Back to the afternoon a nurse I had known for 2 weeks held my hand better than my own daughter had in 2 years. Back to the day I stopped being their mother and became their creditor. Samuel Boone came to Ash Grove in the spring of 1972 with a pipe wrench, his mother's Bible, and $41 in his shoe. That is not me being poetic. $41. I know the number because I am the one who wrote it down, the first entry in a green ledger I bought for 89 cents at the corner drugstore. I was 20. He was 30. He had big hands and a slow smile, and he told me on our second date that he was going to own a piece of this city before he died. Everybody laughed at a plumber who talked like that. Everybody but me. We married that fall. And while Samuel crawled under sinks and sweated copper joints in other people's basements, I sat at our kitchen table with that green ledger, and I did the thing I was good at. I made the money behave. Every dollar that came in, I gave it a job. Some went to rent. Some went to the tithe at Greater Mount Zion, where I still sit in the 3rd pew from the front. Some went into a coffee can on top of the refrigerator we called the someday can. And a little bit every single week, even the weeks we ate beans 4 nights running, went into an account downtown that nobody knew about but me. Samuel used to watch me run my finger down those columns and shake his head. Anna, he'd say, you don't keep books. You interrogate them. He'd laugh. You look at a row of numbers till it confesses. He wasn't wrong. By 1986, the someday can had grown up. We bought a tired old brownstone on Delacroix Street, 3 stories of good bones and bad plumbing in a neighborhood the bank called declining and I called home. A few years after that, Samuel bought a squat 2-storefront building over on Halstead with the profits from the business. A barber shop and a fish market rented the ground floor back then. People thought he was foolish. Old buildings in a black neighborhood nobody downtown cared about. Then downtown started caring. They call it a lot of fancy words now. Revitalization. Renewal. My neighbors and I called it what it was. They discovered we were sitting on land they suddenly wanted. The barber shop is a coffee chain now, the kind that charges $6 for something Samuel used to make on the stove. The fish market is a boutique that sells 1 dress for what I used to spend on groceries in a month. And that tired brownstone on Delacroix, the one the bank sneered at. A young man in a nice coat knocked on my door last year and offered me $1.6 million for it cash and looked hurt when I laughed in his face. But here is the part my children never knew. The part I never told a living soul. That little account downtown, the one I fed a few dollars a week for 35 years, the one where Samuel's life insurance went the day he died and never came back out, that account has a name on it that isn't Boone. It's my maiden name, Anna Caldwell. And the last time I looked, it held $1.9 million. I never spent it. I never touched it. I just let it grow quiet the way you let a child sleep. Between the brownstone and the building on Halstead and Anna Caldwell's patient little fortune, I am, and I say this plainly because a woman my age has earned the right to be plain, worth about $5.5 million. My children thought their mother had a paid-off house and a Social Security check. Lord, they had no idea. Now, let me tell you about the four of them. Because I love them, and I want you to understand that I loved them before all of this so that you understand what it cost. Denise is my oldest. 43, sharp as a letter opener, a licensed real estate agent with a smile she can turn on and off like a faucet. When she was a girl, she'd line up her stuffed animals and sell them to her brothers. I used to think it was cute. She never in her life saw a thing without pricing it, including I would learn her own mother. Gerald came next. 41, built like his daddy, hands like his daddy, and none of his daddy's patience. Gerald wanted the mountaintop without the climb. He started a contracting company on borrowed money, bid a job too big, and the whole thing came down on his head. By last year, he owed people the kind of money that keeps a man up at night. Desperate men do desperate math. Yvonne is my third. My middle girl, 38, a licensed practical nurse. And I'll tell you now so you can carry it the way I had to. Yvonne is the one who knew. She spent her life around sick people and well ones, and she knew that her mother's mind was clear as branch water. She knew it, and she let them say otherwise. That kind of silence has a weight to it. You'll see it bend her before we're through. And then there's my baby, Reggie. 34 years old, and still God love him calling himself an artist. I sent that boy money on the first of every month for so long the bank did it automatically. He never studied. He never quite worked. He just learned better than any lesson I ever meant to teach how fast a deposit hits an account. 4 children. And one more soul I have to name because she's the reason my heart still works at all. Tamara, Yvonne's girl. 16 years old, all elbows and honesty with her grandfather's slow smile. When Tamara was little and the others were grown and gone, she'd climb up on the chair beside me at that same kitchen table and watch me work. I taught that child to play chess before she could ride a bike. I taught her to read a ledger, debit on the left, credit on the right, and never ever lie to the page. The page always knows, baby, I'd tell her. You can fool a person. You can't fool a column. She's the only one of them who ever wanted to learn what I actually did. I want to tell you about a Sunday. One ordinary Sunday a few years back before any of this. I made a roast chicken with potatoes and rosemary, the dish they used to swear was the best thing in the world. The kitchen was loud and warm and full of them. Denise arguing about interest rates, Gerald reaching across the table for seconds, Reggie making everybody laugh, Yvonne washing dishes at the sink, and Tamara beside me, small, then running her finger down a column of numbers, whispering debit, credit, like a prayer. I looked around that table and I thought I did this. Samuel and I. We built a family that loves each other. I was so proud. I want you to hold on to that kitchen, that warm, loud chicken and rosemary kitchen, because I need you to see it later when they set a very different table and tried to bury me at it. Here is the truth I've had a long time to sit with, and I'll give it to you for free. I made one mistake with my children. Just one, but it was the mother of all the others. From the day they were born, I taught them I was endless. I never once let them see the bottom of the well. When they needed, I gave. When they fell, I caught. I said yes so many times they forgot the word had an opposite. I thought I was raising them up on love. I wasn't. I was training them to reach into my pocket without ever once looking at my face. And a well that never says no well. Sooner or later, somebody decides it isn't a person at all. Just plumbing. It started with a fall. I'd had a little spell that spring. The doctors called it a mini-stroke, a warning shot. Frightening at the time, but I came through it clear-headed and stubborn as ever. Then 3 weeks later, I caught my slipper on the edge of a rug I'd been meaning to nail down for a year, and I went down hard on the kitchen floor. Broke my hip. The good one, if there's such a thing. Surgery. And weeks of recovery ahead, the surgeon said. The kind of recovery where you need somebody by your side. I wasn't afraid of the operation. At my age, you make peace with hospitals. What frightened me, the thing that sat on my chest in the dark before they wheeled me in, was being alone. But I wasn't going to be. My children had promised. They'd come to the hospital the night before, all four, and stood around my bed and promised. Denise had it all organized, of course, a little schedule on her phone. I'll take the first days, Mama. Gerald takes midweek. Yvonne's a nurse, she'll check your charts. Reggie flies in for the weekend. Everyone nodding. Everyone squeezing my hand. You'll never be alone, Mama Denise said. I went under the anesthesia at peace. I woke up in pain in a dim room and turned my head toward the chair beside my bed. It was empty. They're coordinating, I told myself. First day, they're sorting the schedule. The second day, the chair was empty. The third day, I called Denise. It rang and went to that bright recorded voice telling me to leave a message. I called Yvonne. Voicemail. I texted my daughter. Sweetheart, I'm having trouble sitting up. Could someone come? And 2 hours later got back a single line. So slammed today, Mama, I'll have Gerald call. Love you. Gerald never called. I learned to tell time by the smell of the trays. Thin broth at noon. Weak tea and 2 cookies at night. On the 5th day, I texted Reggie. Baby, why hasn't anyone come to see me? And he wrote back, plane tickets are crazy right now, Mama, but I'm sending you so much positive energy. Positive energy. To a woman who couldn't reach her own water cup. That was the sum total of my 4 children across 15 days. The only face I saw was Grace. Grace Turner was the night nurse on my floor. A broad, calm woman with warm hands and a low voice, maybe 50, who moved through that ward like she'd been sent. On the 7th day, she came in and found me fighting with my own hair, trying to work a comb through 15 days of tangles, and my arms too weak to lift. She didn't say a word about it. She just took the comb out of my hand, sat down on the edge of the bed, and started at the ends the way you're supposed to, gentle working up. And then she asked me very softly, Miss Anna, do you have any family? I have thought about that question 1,000 times since, because it undid me in a way the pain never could. This kind stranger running a comb through my hair at 9 o'clock at night could not find one single piece of evidence in 15 days that I belonged to anybody. I have 4 children, I whispered. Grace didn't say anything to that. She just nodded and kept working, and after a while she said, well, you've got me tonight. And she meant it. It was Grace who held my hand the first time the therapist stood me up, and the room went white with pain. Grace who smuggled me a real slice of cake the day I walked to the window and back. Not my children. Grace. On the 15th day, the surgeon came in smiling. Wonderful news, Miss Boone. You've healed beautifully. You can go home. Call your family to come get you. I called all 4. Denise voicemail. Yvonne voicemail. Gerald, the phone didn't even ring. Reggie rang and rang into nothing. The surgeon came back an hour later and asked gently if my ride had arrived. And I looked that good man in the eye and I lied for my children one last time. They're just running behind, I said. It's fine. I can manage. Grace helped me into a clean housecoat. She offered to call me a cab. No thank you, baby, I said. I know how to work the app. I'll get an Uber. And that is how I left the hospital. 64 years old, one hand white-knuckled on a walker, a young driver about my grandson's age, loading my little bag into his trunk and asking kindly, You live alone, ma'am? I have 4 children, I said. The words came out of my mouth tasting like a bad joke. He helped me to my door. I let myself into a house that smelled like a closed-up empty thing. I turned on the light and it fell across the wall of photographs. Denise's graduation, Gerald's wedding, Reggie mugging at the camera all those Christmases. All those teeth. I made it to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator because I was thirsty and I actually hoped that one of them had thought of me. Half a bottle of water, a dried-up lemon, an open jar of butter. That was the moment. Not the empty chair. Not the silence. The refrigerator. 15 days and not one of my 4 children had spent $5 or 5 minutes to make sure their mother would have something to eat when she came home from surgery. I sat down at the kitchen table and I waited to cry. The tears didn't come. Something else came instead. Something colder and a great deal more useful. And that is when my phone buzzed. It was the family group chat. The one Reggie set up years ago for holidays. A new message from Reggie, but it wasn't meant for the group. You could tell. It was meant for the others. And my baby, God bless his careless heart, had thumbed the wrong thread. I have it memorized. I'll have it memorized when they lay me down. Guys don't overdo the visiting thing. The less support she looks like she has, the cleaner the file. Denise said the doctor's already noting lacks adequate support, unable to manage self-care. Just keep it minimal till after the hearing. I read it 4 times. The file, the hearing. My children had not forgotten me in that hospital. They had not been too busy. Their absence was not neglect. It was evidence. An empty chair beside a hospital bed 15 days running makes a very persuasive exhibit when you are trying to prove to a court that a woman cannot take care of herself. I sat very still, and the bookkeeper in me, the woman who could make numbers confess, began quietly to add it up. 2 days later, Grace came by the house. I'd asked her to and paid her privately to help me manage while I got my legs back. She was folding a stack of mail and paperwork I'd let pile up, sorting it into piles when she went quiet over one page, then another. "Miss Anna," she said, and her voice had changed. "This isn't a discharge form." I looked up. "This," she said, holding it like it might bite, "is a durable power of attorney. It names your daughter Denise as your agent. Over everything. Your money, your property, your medical decisions." She set it down and picked up the page beneath it, and her face went stiller yet. "And this one?" "Miss Anna, this is a listing agreement. For this house." I remembered signing. Lord help me, I did. In the hospital, the second day after surgery, floating on morphine, Denise at my bedside with a warm stack of papers and that Fawcett smile. "Just some insurance and discharge things Mama sign here and here and here so we can take care of everything." I'd signed because she was my daughter, and I trusted her more than I trusted my own hand. The file number was right there. The date. I'd had morphine that morning, I could barely hold the pen, and the notary who'd stamped it, swearing I was of sound mind and signing freely. A woman I later learned plays bunco with Denise every other Thursday. My brownstone. My Delacroix Street brownstone the someday can made real. Quietly listed. Below market. To a private investor who happened to be a friend of my daughter's. And then the following morning the certified letter came. I had to sign for it. Isn't that something? They made me sign for it. Notice of petition for conservatorship. A hearing set 6 weeks out. The grounds typed neat and cold. Cognitive decline following stroke. Unable to manage financial affairs. Requires appointment of a conservator to protect the estate. To protect the estate. From me. I laid it all out on the kitchen table side by side the way I'd laid out bills for 40 years. Reggie's text, the power of attorney, the listing agreement, the letter from the court. And I read the whole story off those 4 pages the way I used to read a bad month off the ledger. Denise was the architect. The papers, the notary, the plan. Gerald signed on because he was drowning, and my death or the next best thing to it was the only life raft he could see. Reggie went along because Reggie always goes along, and because the first of the month was sacred to him. And Yvonne. My Yvonne the nurse, the one who knew better than anyone that my mind was whole. Yvonne said nothing. Yvonne let them. They hadn't left me alone because they were busy. They'd left me alone on purpose because an empty chair makes a very good exhibit in court. I want to tell you that I broke down, that I called them weeping and begged to know why. That's what they were counting on. A confused, grieving old woman who'd cry and cave and sign whatever they slid across the table next. But they had forgotten who they were dealing with. I did not cry. I got up slow, one hand on the walker, and I crossed to the drawer where I keep my late husband's things. And I took out a green ledger, 35 years old, its spine soft as cloth from my hands. I carried it back to the table. I sat down. I found the last page with writing on it, and I turned past it to a clean one. And at the top, in the steady hand of a woman who has never once lied to a column of numbers, I wrote a single word. Assess. Because they didn't abandon me because they were busy. They abandoned me on purpose, and I did the only thing a woman with a ledger has ever known how to do. I opened to a clean page. Under the word assess that first night home, I wrote 2 more. Protect and decide. 3 words. 40 years of running a household down to 3 words. My hand shook while I wrote them, but I want to be clear about something because it matters. It wasn't the shaking of a weak old woman. It was the other kind. The kind a body does when it has been still too long and the blood finally comes rushing back. I hadn't felt that in years. I made myself a pot of coffee at 9 o'clock at night in an empty house with a hip that screamed every time I crossed the kitchen. I sat back down at the table, and I stopped being a mother who'd been wronged. I became a woman with a problem to solve. The next morning, before the pain pills before breakfast, I made a phone call. "Rutherford and Associates," said the voice. "Camille," I said. It's Anna Boone, Samuel's Anna. I need to see you and I need to see you this week. Camille Rutherford had drawn up every important paper Samuel and I ever signed. She was younger than my Denise when she started with us, a serious girl in a second-hand suit, and she'd grown into the kind of lawyer who returns your call herself. When I sat down across her desk 2 days later and laid out my 4 pages, the text, the power of attorney, the listing, the court notice, she read them slowly twice, and then she took off her glasses. Anna, she said, do you remember what we did 3 years ago? After that little dust-up between Denise and Gerald over the Halstead rents? I did remember, vaguely. A stack of papers, a notary Camille telling me it was housekeeping. We put everything she said into a living trust. The house, the building, the accounts. All of it. And we named exactly one trustee. She looked at me. You. I sat with that. So they can't touch it, I said. It's not that simple, and I won't tell you it is. Camille leaned forward, and this is the part I need you to hear because it's the hinge the whole thing turns on. The trust makes it hard for a conservator to reach your property. But if they can convince a judge you've lost your mind, they can ask the court to remove you as trustee. Take the keys right out of your hand. So this whole fight, Anna, the house, the money, all of it, it comes down to one single question, which is, are you competent? She said it plain. That's the whole game. And that Anna Boone, and here she almost smiled, that is home court for you. Then she opened her bottom drawer and took out an envelope. Cream-colored my name on the front in Samuel's careful block letters, the flap sealed with tape gone yellow. He left this with me the year before he passed, she said quietly. His instructions were strange. He said, give it to Anna only if the children ever forget who she is. She slid it across the desk. He also had me write something into that trust. A no-contest clause, but a wide one. Wider than usual. It doesn't just punish anyone who fights the will. It punishes anyone who tries to have you declared incompetent or tries to strip you of control. She shook her head, a little wonder in it. Your husband, Anna. 15 years ago. He saw this coming. I did not open the envelope in her office. I put it in my purse next to the ledger, and I felt Samuel's hand on my shoulder as sure as if he were standing there. All right, I said. Now I need one more thing. I need to know where the money went. Their money. Camille sent me to Leonard Pace, a forensic accountant with reading glasses pushed up on a bald head, and the patience of a man who reads bank statements for sport. It took Leonard 9 days to hand me a story I already half knew told in numbers, which is the only way I fully believe anything. Gerald had borrowed $180,000 against his expected inheritance. He'd used a projection of my estate as collateral. My son had in the coldest possible terms taken out a loan against my death. And the note was coming due. Foreclosure on his own house, weeks away. Reggie was buried in credit cards the way water is buried in a flood. And Denise. Denise had already spent a commission. She'd advanced herself money against the sale of my brownstone. A sale that hadn't closed. A sale that couldn't close unless I was out of the way. I set Leonard's report next to Camille's papers on my kitchen table, and the last piece clicked into place with a sound I almost heard. They weren't just greedy. They were cornered. Gerald's clock was ticking. Denise had spent money she didn't have, and every one of them needed the same thing at the same time. They needed their mother declared incapable, and they needed it fast before the whole house of cards they'd each built came down. That's why they hadn't waited for me to die. They couldn't afford to. And a cornered person, I have learned, makes mistakes. So I got to work quietly the way I do everything. I made copies of Reggie's text and had it preserved properly. I got certified copies of my hospital records. Every day, every empty visitor log, 15 days of proof that nobody came. I kept the power of attorney and the listing agreement sealed in a folder. And then I did the thing that turned their whole plan inside out. I called the office of the most respected neurologist in the county. A Dr. Adeyemi and I made an appointment, and I paid for it myself. And I sat in his office and took every test he had. The one with the clock face. The one where you remember the 5 words. The one where you count backward from 100 by sevens. I aced it. Near perfect at 64 3 months after a stroke. My children were building a case that my mind was gone. I now held a signed, dated expert medical opinion that it was sharp as a tack. I'd taken their only weapon and made it mine. There was one more thing to do, and it was the coldest and the cleanest of all. I called Camille back and I amended the trust. Because I was the trustee, and I was provably now of sound mind, I had every legal right to do it. I sat in her office and I struck 3 names out of my own estate. Denise, Gerald, Reggie. The bulk of everything would go into a foundation in Samuel's name. A portion I left for Yvonne, but conditional held back to be earned or lost in the years to come. And for Tamara, a fund, college, a future. The one child at that old kitchen table who ever wanted to learn what the numbers meant. We had it notarized. We sealed it. Camille locked it in her drawer. Not one of my children knew that the inheritance they were tearing my life apart to seize had quietly already stopped being theirs. That is the part I want the ones like me to hear. The mothers, the grandmothers, the women who spent a lifetime being the well everybody drinks from. You do not have to shout. You do not have to weep. You do not even have to warn them. You simply have to know your own worth on paper in ink and put it somewhere their hands can't reach. And here is the joke of it, the joke I laughed at alone in my kitchen at midnight. My children were fighting over the old house and Mama's little pension. They were willing to lose their souls over what they thought was a modest estate. They had no idea about Anna Caldwell. No idea that the woman they'd written off as a confused old lady was in fact the single best money manager any of them would ever meet. They saw prey. They were looking at the sharpest ledger in the state, and they thought it was an empty chair. But I still had to keep the mask on. So when Denise came by that week, sweet as pie, kissing my cheek, saying, "Mama, let me just take these papers off your hands. You shouldn't be worrying about all this in your condition." I smiled at my daughter. I poured her a cup of tea. I said, "Thank you, baby. I trust you." And under the table out of her sight, my hand was closed so tight around that green ledger that my knuckles ached for an hour after she left. 2 days later, there was a knock at my back door, soft the way a child knocks when she's not supposed to be there. It was Tamara. She'd taken 2 buses to get to me, and her mother didn't know, and her face was a wreck. She sat down at the kitchen table, and she couldn't look at me. "Grandma," she finally said, "I heard them. At Aunt Denise's house. They were all in the dining room, and I was on the stairs, and they were talking about you about the hearing about the nursing home, Grandma. They were laughing about which one." Her voice broke clean in half. And I got so scared and so mad, I turned on my phone. I recorded it. The whole thing. I have it. I reached across and took my granddaughter's shaking hands in mine. But it's my mom, Grandma. The tears came now, the real ones, the kind that come from a place too deep to fake. If I give it to anybody, I'm telling on my own mother. What kind of person does that? I held her hands and I did not tell her what to do. That's important. I did not use that child. "Baby," I said, "you don't have to choose anything today. You keep that recording somewhere safe, somewhere nobody knows. Some truths just have to wait for the right room." I squeezed her hands. "And whatever you decide when the time comes, I'll love you exactly the same. You hear me?" "Exactly the same." She nodded. She wiped her face on her sleeve, 16 years old, and carrying a weight no child should carry. And I sat there long after she'd gone, and I thought, Lord, look what they've done. They've made a little girl choose between doing right and loving her mother. That was the moment my grief finished turning into something else. That was the moment it became resolve. I started closing the accounts. Not the bank accounts, the other kind. The standing orders, the open tabs, the 40 years of yes. I called Reggie first because Reggie was the easiest and because the first of the month was coming and I wanted him to feel it land. "Hey, Mama," he was all sunshine. He didn't know I'd seen the text. None of them did. "How you feeling? I've been praying so hard for you." "I'm mending, baby," I said. "I called to tell you something. The transfer, the one that goes out on the 1st, I've stopped it." A silence. Then carefully. "Stopped it, like the bank messed up." "No, sweetheart. The bank did just fine. I stopped it." I kept my voice as level as a countertop. "You're 34 years old. I've been paying your way since the day you were born. That's done now. Mama, I live off that." Panic climbing into his throat. "How am I supposed to, what am I going to do?" "Work, baby," I said gently, the way you'd tell a child the stove is hot. The way I learned to call myself an Uber home from the hospital when nobody came. "You'll learn too. I have faith in you." And I meant it. That was the terrible, loving truth of it. I did. I hung up on my youngest, and I did not cry. Gerald did not wait for a phone call. Gerald came to the house 2 days later, and he did not knock. He pounded the way he did when he was 6 and angry, and I opened the door to find my son filling the frame red, faced a man with a foreclosure notice and no plan. "What is going on, Mama? Reggie's losing his mind. Denise says you've been acting strange, and I get a call from my lender." He caught himself. "Your lender," I said. "About the $180,000 you borrowed against my estate." The color went out of his face like water out of a sink. "Come in, Gerald," I said. "Sit down." And I laid it on the table. Leonard's report. The loan. The collateral, which was in plain black type, anticipated inheritance from the estate of Anna Boone. You took out a loan, I said quietly, against a thing that is not yours. That is not yours yet. Do you understand what you did? You didn't make a financial plan, son. You placed a bet. You bet on your mother's grave, and then you got impatient, waiting for the payout. He didn't yell. That's the thing about the truth. When it finally hits a man, it takes the yell right out of him. He sat at my table with his big hands hanging between his knees, and for one moment, he looked like my boy again. Then Denise got to him, and the moment passed. Because 3 days later, all 4 of them called with the same invitation in the same careful words. Would I come to Denise's house Sunday evening for a family dinner? To talk about my care. I knew exactly what it was. I went anyway. I put on my navy dress, the one Samuel said matched my eyes, and I painted my nails, and I walked in on my walker playing the part they needed me to play. The fragile mother come to be handled. I want to tell you about that dinner, because it was the worst night of my life, and I need you to see why. The table was set beautiful. Denise's good china, and laid out among the plates where the serving dishes should have been, were papers, a financial power of attorney, and a glossy brochure thick and expensive for a place called Serenity Gardens Assisted Living and Memory Care. There was a stranger at the table, a woman Denise introduced as a specialist, Mama just here to help us all talk, hired to evaluate me over dinner, and then they began. Not talking to me, talking about me right in front of my face as if the chair I sat in were already empty. She forgets things now, Denise said to the specialist sadly. Just last week she left the stove on all night. A lie, a flat lie, and my other children nodded along to it, my own children nodding. It's for her own good, Yvonne murmured and would not meet my eyes. Just sign the papers, Mama, Reggie said, and let us take the weight off you. I sat very still, and I let it wash over me, all of it. And it was worse than the hospital, worse than the empty refrigerator, because in the hospital at least they'd had the decency to do it behind my back. And then I saw Tamara. She was in the corner of the room on the arm of the sofa where a 16-year-old sits when the grown folks are having grown talk. And she was looking at me with her eyes brimming, and she gave the smallest shake of her head. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry. And I understood all at once, looking at the practiced way they passed the papers, the rehearsed sad voices. They had practiced this. They'd sat in this room and rehearsed how to bury their mother over her favorite china. This was my roast chicken table, my warm, loud Sunday kitchen, and they had turned it into a courtroom and cast me as the defendant and never even told me the trial had begun. I did not rage. I want you to know that. I have thought since about all the things I could have screamed, and I'm glad I didn't scream a single one. I set down my fork. I picked up my purse. I stood slow, both hands on the walker, and the room went quiet, the way a room does when the one person nobody watched decides to speak. You set a beautiful table, I said, to bury a woman who isn't dead yet. Nobody moved. I raised you, I said. I did not raise this. I looked at each of them one by one, and last of all at Denise. Whatever it is you're planning, you go on and finish it in a courtroom, because that's where it's headed now. And I will be there. Every day. In the front row. And I walked out of my daughter's house. I made it to the car. I made it around the corner out of sight of the windows, and then I pulled over and I put my forehead on the steering wheel, and for the first and only time in this whole long story, I wept. Not because I was afraid. I want to be clear about that because it's the thing that took me 64 years to learn. I did not cry because I was losing. I cried because I finally truly understood that the family in that warm kitchen, the one I'd been so proud of, the one I'd built, had never been real. I was crying at a funeral. My own children were alive and well, and one town over, and I was sitting in a parked car mourning them like the dead. You can grieve a person who's still breathing. Nobody tells you that. It's the loneliest grief there is. Then I dried my face, and I drove home, and I called Camille in the morning. Because Denise, it turned out, had not liked how calm I was at that dinner. Calm frightens a guilty person more than tears ever could. A weeping mother they know how to handle. A quiet one they can't read. So Denise did what Denise does. She spent money to solve a problem. She hired a man to watch me, and that man saw me walk into the offices of Rutherford and Associates. She knew I had a lawyer now, and she panicked. She went to court and filed for an emergency temporary conservatorship, the kind you file when you claim there's urgent danger. She swore I was on the verge of dissipating the estate, giving away money in my confusion. It was a lie, but it was a clever lie because it did one thing. It dragged the whole hearing forward. Weeks sooner. It boxed me into a corner before I could get every last piece in place. I remember Camille calling to tell me, her voice tight with apology, and I remember laughing, because Denise had just made the cornered person's mistake. She'd rushed us both into a courtroom before she had any idea what was waiting for her there, before she knew about the capacity evaluation, before she knew about the amended trust, before she'd ever heard the name Anna Caldwell. She thought she was springing a trap. She was walking into one. The night before the hearing, there was a knock at my front door, late, and when I opened it, my daughter Yvonne was standing on the porch, and she was not the composed nurse who'd nodded along at that terrible dinner. She was falling apart. Mama, she could barely get it out. I knew your mind was fine. I've known the whole time I'm a nurse, Mama, and I sat there and I let them. She pressed her hand over her mouth. I did it because I owe money, and because Denise scares me, and because I told myself, you be okay, you're always okay. I chose the wrong side to survive. And I can't do it. I can't stand up in that courtroom tomorrow and be part of it. I can't. I looked at my middle child on my porch in the dark, and I did not open my arms right away. I want to be honest about that. Some hurts don't let you. But then behind her, I saw a second figure come up the walk. Tamara. She stepped up beside her mother, and she was crying, and she was holding her phone in both hands like it weighed 100 pounds. And she looked at Yvonne, and then she looked at me, and she said the bravest thing I have ever heard a child say. I have a recording of all of them planning it. She swallowed. And I'm going to give it to Grandma's lawyer. Even if her voice cracked, but she didn't stop, even if it means telling on my own mom. Yvonne turned and stared at her daughter, and in that one look was every hard thing about what we do to the people who come after us. I came off that porch as fast as my hip would let me, and I took my granddaughter in my arms. Baby, I whispered into her hair. Listen to me. Doing right by somebody you love, sometimes it costs you somebody else you love. That's not a curse. You hear me? That is the price of a spine. And you just paid it at 16, standing up straighter than grown men 3 times your age. Over her shoulder, I met Yvonne's eyes, and I gave my middle daughter the smallest nod. Not forgiven? Not yet. But the door is open. That night, Camille and I laid it all out on my kitchen table one last time like a hand of cards before you turn them over. The trust, the independent capacity evaluation signed by the best neurologist in the county, the amended trust sealed, Tamara's recording, Yvonne who would testify, 15 days of hospital records with nobody's name in the visitor log, the power of attorney they'd tricked out of a woman on morphine, the listing agreement for a house that was never theirs to sell, and Samuel's wide, patient 15-year-old no contest clause, waiting like a bear trap under a rug. They had scheduled a hearing to prove I could not be trusted with my own money. I let them, because I had learned the one thing my whole quiet life had been teaching me entry by entry, dollar by dollar, all along. The fastest way to end a lie is to give it a courtroom. The courtroom smelled like varnished wood and old paper. You've been here with me since the beginning, so you already know that. A ceiling fan turning slow, a radiator ticking. My 4 pages had become a folder, and the folder sat closed on the table in front of me, and my hands rested on top of it, still wine-colored nails, no smudges. Their lawyer went first. He was good. He stood up and he painted a picture of a sweet, declining woman, forgetful, isolated, a danger to herself and her own money. He entered the hospital records showing I'd been alone for 15 days. Alone, he said, shaking his head as if the emptiness of that chair were my failing and not theirs. He described the stove left on, the confusion, the urgent need for her loving children to step in and protect her. And here is what I did while he talked. I sat with my head down. I let my shoulders round. I let my hands tremble just a little on the folder. I gave that courtroom exactly the woman my children had promised it. Small and lost and done. I felt Denise relax 3 feet to my left. I felt her think she'd won. Mrs. Boone. Judge Harmon, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, leaned toward me. Is there anything you'd like to say or present before I rule? And I stood up. I didn't need the walker to do it. I'd been walking without it for a week by then. Grace and a good physical therapist had seen to that. But I'd brought it to court and leaned on it coming in because a woman learns to keep a card or two face down. I set it aside now. I stood up straight, and I watched my daughter's face change. Your Honor, I said, and my voice did not tremble at all. My children have told you I've lost my mind. So before I say one word more, let's put that question to rest. Camille handed up the first document. This is a full neurological and cognitive evaluation I said performed 3 weeks ago by Dr. Adeyemi at my request and paid for by me. You'll find his conclusion on the last page. He writes that my cognition is, and I quote, exceptional for my age with no evidence whatsoever of impairment. A woman who's lost her mind does not schedule the exam that clears her. The judge read it. He looked up at me differently than he had a moment before. Now, I let out a breath. About the estate they're so worried I'll mismanage. Camille handed up the trust. 3 years ago, my late husband's attorney and I placed everything I own into a living trust. I am the sole trustee. That means, Your Honor, that to take my property, this court would first have to remove me as trustee, and the only grounds for that would be the incompetence Dr. Adeyemi just ruled out. I let that sit. Their whole case rests on a foundation that doesn't exist. Objection, their lawyer started. And there's more, I said over him, because I am 64 years old and I have earned the right to finish a sentence. As trustee being of sound mind, I exercised my legal right 2 weeks ago. I amended the trust. I looked at my 3 oldest children then. Denise, Gerald, Reggie. Denise, Gerald, Reginald. Whatever you win or lose in this room today no longer matters, because you are not in my trust. I took your names out myself. You have been tearing my life apart to inherit something that stopped being yours a full 2 weeks before you walked in that door. The sound Denise made, I won't forget it. Not a word, just air. And one thing more which none of you knew because your father was a wiser man than any of you gave him credit for. Camille handed up the last page. 15 years ago, Samuel had a clause written into that trust. A no-contest clause. A wide one. It provides that any beneficiary who attempts to seize control of my affairs or to have me declared incompetent forfeits everything. I looked at Denise. By filing this petition, baby, you didn't just fail to take my estate. You triggered the clause that would have erased your share, even if I'd left you in. Then Camille played 30 seconds of a recording, my children's own voices in Denise's dining room laughing about which nursing home. And she entered into evidence the power of attorney. They'd slipped past a woman on morphine and the agreement to sell my house below market to Denise's friend, and she used 2 words I watched land on that judge like stones. Elder financial abuse. Denise shot to her feet. Your Honor, this is... The gavel came down. Once. Hard. And I watched it happen. The exact moment the confidence drained out of all 4 faces and left them white. The moment they understood that the confused old woman they'd come to bury had been 3 moves ahead the entire time. Judge Harmon dismissed their petition. He didn't just dismiss it. He referred the matter of that power of attorney to the county for review, and he looked at my children over his glasses the way my mother used to look at me, and it was not kind. I gathered my folder. I picked up the walker I didn't need, and before I left that room, I turned and I faced the 4 of them one last time. Not to hurt them. I was past hurting them. To close the account. I didn't come here to win, I said. You can't win a family you've already lost. I came here to make true on paper what you made true in that hospital room. I am on my own now. I felt it settle over me light as a shawl, and for the first time in 40 years, Lord, I am light. They came to the brownstone that same evening. Of course they did. The 3 of them on my porch on Delacroix Street, and the fight was all gone out of them now. Now it was the other thing. The sweet thing. The begging. Mama. Denise had switched the faucet warm now, tears standing in her eyes. We're family. Whatever happened in there, we can fix it. We're your children. Gerald stood behind her, and my son was crying openly because the foreclosure was real and coming, and there was no inheritance to catch him now. And Reggie, my baby, actually sank down onto my top step, his back against the railing the way he used to sit when he was small. I stood in my own doorway, and I did not raise my voice, and I did not slam anything. I just closed the account. 1 entry at a time. To Denise. You didn't lose a case today. You lost the right to call me when you're scared. That door doesn't reopen. To Gerald. I would have given you the money. If you had only asked. Instead, you bet on my grave. Now you get to live with the odds. To Reggie on my step. 34 years I paid your way, baby. The kindest thing your mother can do for you now is stop paying. They had no answer. There's no answer to a ledger that's finally been balanced. And then I looked past them to the bottom of the walk where 2 people stood a little apart from the rest. Yvonne and Tamara. I held out my hand toward my granddaughter, and then after a moment toward my middle daughter, too. You 2, I said, don't owe me one thing. But I'll tell you what I told this child when she was small. My voice caught just once and I let it. My table's still got 2 chairs at it. And if you ever want to learn how to keep a ledger honest, how to look at your own life and not lie to the page well, you know where I live. I stepped back inside my house. Yvonne and Tamara came up the walk past the other 3 and in through my door, and I closed it. And here is the picture I want to leave you with before I tell you how it all came out. That chair, the one beside my hospital bed, the one that sat empty 15 days running while a stranger combed my hair, that chair wasn't empty anymore. It just had different people in it now. People I chose. I did not buy a yacht. I know that's what some folks expect when a woman my age comes into what I came into. But I'd been rich a long time before anybody knew it, and money never was the point. The point was the well. Who gets to drink and who decides? So I started a foundation. The Samuel Boone Fund, named for a man who came to Ashgrove with $41 in his shoe and saw further than all of us. Its work is simple. It finds the old people, the ones lying alone in hospital rooms, watching an empty chair, learning to tell time by the smell of the trays. And it sends someone to sit with them, to hold their hand when the therapist stands them up, to comb their hair at 9 o'clock at night and ask them about their lives. The first person I hired was Grace. I gave the building on Halstead to the neighborhood. A real community center now, Samuel's name over the door. I kept the brownstone. A woman should keep the house she built her someday can into. I won't lie to you and tell you it all healed clean. The page doesn't let you lie. Denise doesn't call. Gerald lost his house and I did not stop it, and I have made my peace with that, though peace is a bigger word than what I actually feel. Reggie, last I heard, has a job, an actual job. I hope it's the making of him. I don't contact any of the 3. That grief I told you about, the one for people still living, I carry it every day. It doesn't lift. You just learn to walk with the weight. Yvonne I did not simply forgive. She was complicit, and there's no ledger in the world where that comes free. I didn't put her money back. What I gave her was smaller and harder and worth more. A chance. A standing invitation to earn her way back into her mother's life, slow over years, the honest way. She's trying. Some Sundays she comes and we don't say much, and that's all right. Tamara has a college fund now and a grandmother in the front row of everything she does. It cost her what she did. She and her mother went a long cold while before they could look at each other again. That's the price of a spine, and I never once told that child it would be cheap. There was one more thing. The night after the hearing alone in my kitchen, I finally opened Samuel's envelope. The cream-colored one. My name in his block letters. It was short. It said, "Anna, if Camille is handing you this, then the children have forgotten what I never did. You were never the books girl. You were the fortune. You always were. Stop giving yourself away by the dollar. Keep some. Keep you." 15 years that letter waited in a drawer for the exact night I would need it. I read it 3 times at my kitchen table in the warm quiet with my granddaughter asleep upstairs. And then I did the last thing. I opened the green ledger, 35 years old, spine soft as cloth to a clean page. And where I once would have written a name and a number, a debt somebody owed me, an amount I was owed and would never collect this time, I just wrote one line. Paid in full. They spent their whole lives waiting to inherit from me. In the end, the only thing they inherited was the silence they left me in. And I learned to make that silence sing. If you've ever had to redraw the lines inside your own love to say no more to someone you'd have given anything, I'd like to hear about it. Leave it below. Somewhere out there is a woman sitting beside her own empty chair tonight, and your words might be the ones that help her stand up straight. Stay with me. There are more stories to come.